Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at this idea of a liaison. You know, that person who kind of bridges the gaps between people, helps them understand each other.
Right. The facilitator.
Exactly. Maybe take a second. Can you think of a time you've been that middle person?
I think most people probably can, yeah. It's a pretty common experience in one way or another.
For sure. And today we're diving into a really interesting personal account. It explores what it's actually like being that liaison, specifically within a family dealing with language differences.
Ah,
Yeah. And we even have this image associated with it. Someone looking pretty nervous, holding coffee, literally standing between two other people sitting down.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that paints a picture.
Doesn't it? It
Yeah.
really captures that feeling of being stuck in the middle. So our mission here is to unpack the complexities, the often sort of unseen work, and the emotions tied up in making those connections. Maybe shed some light on your own experiences, too.
So this specific source, this reflection, it describes someone who was pretty essential, wasn't just helpful, but actually necessary because of language barriers.
Necessary, yeah. Both within the family and, like, dealing with the outside world.
Right, a constant go-between.
And what really jumped out at me reading it was the mixed feelings involved.
The ambivalence.
Yeah. Like wanting to help, obviously, but also feeling, I don't know, burdened, a bit resentful even. The person actually used the phrase, feeling like a tool.
Wow, yeah. That's strong. And it touches on something important, how help offered freely can sometimes morph into an expectation.
Exactly. Has
Sure.
that ever happened to you, listener? Where, you know, you start out helping and then suddenly it's just assumed you'll always do it?
Man, that shift can happen subtly. Over time, it just becomes the default, and the appreciation might fade while the emotional weight on the liaison just keeps accumulating, often without anyone really noticing.
Right. Under the radar. And the contributor talks about coping strategies, ways they manage those, you know, less positive feelings.
Okay, like what?
Well, things like kind of mentally putting distance between themselves and the task, sort of casting a negative light on it internally, maybe, and just pushing through, trying to pace themselves to or lessen the tension.
That makes sense. Those sound like protective mechanisms, really.
Yeah,
Necessary ones when you're constantly navigating different people's needs, different perspectives. You need to find ways to preserve your own energy.
definitely. Which actually leads us to this quote from Carl Jung that feels really relevant here.
Yeah.
He said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed."
Ah, interesting. And you see the connection to the liaison role.
Totally, because the liaison isn't just a neutral pipe passing information back and forth, right? They're in the reaction.
Exactly. Jung's point is that these interactions, they're active, they change things. The liaison isn't just transmitting their presence, their interpretation, their choices.
Yeah.
It all influences the communication, and they're influenced by it.
So they get transferred too.
Precisely. This constant mediating, this balancing act between different viewpoints, it can subtly change the liaison's own feelings, their own perspective. For better, or sometimes, as this source suggests, with some real emotional cost.
So putting it all together then, we're seeing this significant, often invisible emotional labor involved in being the go-between. There's this real risk of feeling underappreciated, especially when it just becomes routine.
Yeah, the tool feeling again.
Right. And this idea that the very act of connecting others can actually fundamentally change us.
And maybe, as you've been listening along, you've started thinking about your own times acting as that middle person.
Yeah.
What were the dynamics? What were the unspoken things happening? What sorts of emotions were you dealing with?
It really makes you think, doesn't it? Which brings us to our final thought for you to mull over.
Okay.
How does it affect us? Consistently being that bridge, always facilitating understanding between others. How does that subtly reshape our own identity, you know? And maybe even our relationships with the very people we're connecting?
That's a deep one to consider.
It is. Something to think about. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us today.